My husband took me to dinner with his boss. After hearing them speak German for less than 5 minutes, I quietly left and filed for divorce. The next morning, it was the start of the rainy season in Seattle. The late afternoon sky was a murky smoke-like gray, and the asphalt was still slick with puddles from a sudden downpour. The wind swept through the older condo complex, carrying the scent of damp earth and the warm aroma of dinners being started in nearby kitchens. In that suspended atmosphere, it was easy to pretend everything was peaceful. That is until the front door clicked shut, leaving you alone to face the reality of your life. My name is Valerie. I'm 34 and I work as an art director and commercial photographer, building visual campaigns for lifestyle, beauty, and wellness brands. When outsiders look at me, they often say a familiar phrase: "You've got it made." I have my looks. I make my own money and my husband works for a major corporate firm. Hearing it so often, I grew used to it and just smiled. But some compliments smell sweet on the outside while leaving a bitter taste in your soul. My husband is Harrison. He's 2 years older than me and works as an account director at a corporate marketing firm handling distribution for international brands. On the surface, Harrison is the kind of man who makes people feel secure. His dress shirts are always crisp, his hair neatly styled, his voice never raised, and he knows exactly how to behave in public. Back in the day, my mom even told me, "He looks mature and grounded. He'll definitely take good care of his wife." Back then, I believed it, too. So much so that I bet my entire youth on this marriage. I never imagined there would come a day when I'd have to sit and count every tiny crack in it, like tracing the fractures on a porcelain bowl. 7 years into our marriage, our place wasn't huge, just a mid-range condo on a street lined with old elm trees in Capitol Hill. It wasn't luxurious, but it was cozy. From the cream-colored drapes to the snake plant on the balcony to the spice rack in the kitchen, everything was arranged by my hands. I used to love the feeling of coming home from work, opening the door to see the lights on, the floors clean, and hearing the bubbling of a pot on the stove. No matter how strong a woman is, deep down, she always wants a place to return to and let her guard down. It's just a pity that over time that home began to feel more like a shelter from the rain than a place of true peace. That evening, I opened the door just past 6:00 p.m. Harrison was already home. His shoes were neatly placed on the rack, his leather briefcase on the sofa. He was sitting in front of the TV staring at CNBC, but his expression was vacant. I walked past and greeted him like any other day. "You're eating at home tonight." Harrison didn't turn around. He just gave a short yeah. It was a light, empty that felt colder than a glass of water left out overnight. I went into the kitchen, hung my tote bag on a hook, changed into my loungewear, and started prepping dinner. In the fridge, there was some chicken breast, a few stalks of asparagus, some baby bella mushrooms, and half a butternut squash. I made a quick chicken stir-fry with a garlic glaze, roasted the squash, and sauteed the veggies. It wasn't a fancy meal, just classic, warm, home-cooked comfort food. I still kept the habit of cooking dinner every night when I wasn't tied up with late shoots. Not because anyone forced me to, but because I once believed that a shared meal was the anchor that pulled people closer. Only later did I understand that no matter how hot the food is, it can't warm a heart that has gone cold. When I set the table, I called Harrison for dinner. He turned off the TV, walked over, pulled out a chair, and sat down. Throughout the meal, the only sound was the faint clinking of silverware against plates. I passed him a piece of chicken. "Yeah, just leave it there," he said, not asking if I was tired from work, not bringing up his day, not even bothering to look at me for more than a second. People say that when a husband and wife are united, they can drain the ocean. Yet, there we were, sitting at the same table, as distant as two strangers sharing a booth in a diner. Sometimes, I think silence in a marriage is the most terrifying thing of all. Arguments at least produce noise to let you know a relationship still exists. But with prolonged silence, people get used to the fact that they no longer need to understand each other. Halfway through the meal, my phone buzzed. I saw the caller ID and my heart sank slightly. It was my mother-in-law, Eleanor. "Hi, Eleanor," I answered. Her voice on the other end was sweet but sharp. "Valerie, I was at Pike Place Market this afternoon and saw some beautiful wild-caught salmon. I was going to drop it off, but I figured you two weren't home yet. I still have that spare key. By the way, I'll come over tomorrow." "Okay." She paused a beat, then asked, "Is Harrison home?" "Yes. We're having dinner." Men come home exhausted from work. Mind how you speak to him, Valerie? His job is highly stressful. Don't give him anything else to worry about. I smiled bitterly to myself. I hadn't complained a single time. Nor had I ever told my mother-in-law how exhausted I was. Yet, her advice always revolved around how I needed to ensure her son could breathe easily. I kept my voice even. "I know, Eleanor." I hung up and placed my phone on the table. Harrison kept eating as if he hadn't heard a thing. I looked at the man in front of me and suddenly felt like I was looking at a stranger. After 7 years of living together, I knew he liked his soup piping hot, hated cilantro, preferred charcoal grey shirts over white ones, and needed the low hum of a fan to fall asleep when he had insomnia. I remembered it all. But he, perhaps for a long time now, didn't want to remember anything about me other than the fact that I was his wife. The person who split the mortgage, the electricity, the water bill, the holiday gifts for both families, and all the nameless, invisible chores in this condo. Outside the balcony, the warm yellow lights of the neighboring apartments flickered on. From a distance, the building looked like a picture of domestic warmth. Only those behind each closed door knew whether it held a happy home or a life slowly fracturing without anyone daring to say it out loud. I quietly scooped another spoonful of food onto my plate. A damp draft blew through the kitchen window, making the blind sway. Suddenly, I felt exhausted. Not the physical exhaustion of running around all day, but the exhaustion of a woman who has been strong for so long that no one even bothers to ask if she's sad. Some failing marriages don't require a massive blow or a dramatic declaration of abandonment. The marriage is still there. Everyone is present. The bills are paid. The morning greetings are spoken. But the core has been hollowed out bit by bit like wood eaten by termites. It looks perfectly intact on the outside, but one light touch and it crumbles to dust. The next morning, I woke up at 10 to 6. A light drizzle was falling outside, leaving a thin layer of condensation on the balcony glass. I slipped on my slippers, went into the kitchen, and made some oatmeal with fresh berries, warming up a few croissants from the day before. Harrison had an early start and always complained that dry cereal was hard to swallow in the mornings. So I usually made something warm. An outsider might call me a devoted wife. Only I knew that a woman's devotion often isn't born from joy, but from a habit forged over time. By the time Harrison walked out buttoning his shirt, I had already poured his coffee and set the oatmeal on the table. He sat down, stirred his bowl twice, and asked, "Are you shooting on location today?" "Yeah. Out in Bellevue. I probably won't be back until late afternoon." "Yeah." There it was again. That tone half caring, half obligatory. I glanced at him and didn't say another word. Sometimes I thought if I collected all his dismissive yas, I could build a physical wall between us. He finished eating, stood up, wiped his mouth, grabbed his briefcase, and said, "Remember to pay the Seattle City light bill before the 12 teach. The HOA sent a reminder yesterday, too." He said it so naturally, as if it were my default duty. I nodded. "Yeah, I know." The door clicked shut and the condo returned to its familiar echoing silence. I carried the bowls to the sink and as I listened to the running water, my mind automatically began tallying the expenses I had covered over the years. The electricity, water, parking fees, internet, groceries, the expensive joint supplements for his mother whenever the weather turned cold, the gifts for his extended family during the holidays, paying to fix the AC last summer, buying a new fridge the year before, the baby shower gift for his cousin. Individually, none of these amounts were massive, but bundled together, they formed a heavy, smoldering burden that I had been shouldering the longest. When we first got married, I didn't mind. I figured a husband and wife were a team. Whoever was more financially stable at the time took on more of the load. I genuinely believed in partnership. Back then, Harrison's income wasn't high and his career was unstable. So, I proactively stepped up. Whatever we lacked at the end of the month, I quietly covered. When his mother needed an MRI for her back, I transferred the money first. When my side of the family needed help, I handled it out of my own pocket to spare him the embarrassment. I never threw these things in his face. In my mind, family shouldn't keep a tally of every dollar. But not everyone thinks the way I do. I remember a time over a year ago when we attended a wedding for one of his former colleagues. I wore a deep emerald dress and light makeup, having rushed straight from a photo shoot. As soon as we entered the lobby, a female friend of his looked at me with a bright smile. "Wow, Valerie, you look incredibly chic lately. I heard your freelance business is booming. That's amazing." I just smiled. But before I could say a word, Harrison interjected. "She just got lucky with the timing. You know how freelancers are feast or famine. It's not a stable career." His words were casual, but they were enough to freeze the smile on my face. When someone praises your spouse, even if you aren't beaming with pride, you at least shouldn't dismiss their hard work as mere luck. Back then, I told myself he was just trying to be humble. Only later did I realize it was his way of keeping his own ego inflated. It wasn't just once. It happened constantly. If someone asked if my business was doing well, he'd say, "Well, she's a woman in a visual industry, so it looks glamorous, but it fluctuates." If someone praised my work ethic, he'd smirk and say, "She's a perfectionist, but she's pretty average when it comes to keeping house." One jab, two jabs. Over time, they became thorns. I hurt, but I chose to endure. I sat him down for an honest conversation once on a rainy night much like this one. I told him, "Harrison, when outsiders compliment me, it doesn't mean they are putting you down. Why do we have to compete over words?" He set his water glass on the table, his voice low but icy. "It's easy for you to say. You're the one getting all the praise, not me." I sat there in stunned silence. Translated plainly, he felt small, but instead of standing up taller, he chose to drag me down to a level that made him comfortable. Around 10:00 a.m. While I was retouching layouts for a client, my phone rang. It was Eleanor. "Hi, Eleanor." She let out a long sigh before speaking. "Valerie, I went for my checkup yesterday and the doctor changed my arthritis medication. This new one is out of network. It's almost $4.50. When you have a minute, could you swing by the pharmacy and pick it up for me?" "Does Harrison know?" I asked. She replied immediately, her tone laced with passive-aggressive blame. "He's working all the time. Why bother him and stress him out? If you have the time, just get it for me. It's a daughter-in-law's duty, isn't it?" I paused for 2 seconds before saying, "Sure. I'll swing by the pharmacy this afternoon." "Good. I know you're the only one who knows her place." The call ended. I put my phone down, a lump forming in my throat. Knows her place. It sounded like a compliment, but to me, it was a perfectly crafted noose. Whenever I did something for them, I was just doing my duty. But if I was slow even once, if I was too tired even once, I instantly became a bad wife. On my way home that afternoon, I picked up her medication and transferred the COA amount to her account based on the receipt she texted me. The task itself was quick, but the weight in my chest was heavy. I didn't regret spending the money. What exhausted me was how everyone naturally assumed I was the one who had to handle everything, while no one ever bothered to ask one simple question. "Are you tired?" That evening, as I was packing the medication into a bag to drop off at her house the next morning, Harrison walked into the kitchen. He saw the pharmacy bag. "Is that for my mom?" I just picked it up. The doctor changed her prescription. He nodded as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Then he threw out a casual line. "Make sure you keep the receipt. If we have any extra cash at the end of the month, I'll reimburse you for part of it." I looked at him and let out a dry laugh. "Keep your money. when you actually intend to pay for it? Then tell me. Harrison frowned. What do you mean by that? I neatly folded the top of the pharmacy bag. Nothing. I just realized that some things become a habit. When someone carries the load for too long, eventually they aren't even allowed to complain that their shoulders hurt. I turned and walked straight into the bedroom. Outside, the rain began drumming against the metal awning. Standing in front of the closet, I suddenly felt an overwhelming ache in my spine. Not from carrying heavy gear, not from walking, but from the invisible burdens of this household. The better you are at carrying the weight, the faster people forget that you are made of flesh and bone. How much money I contributed was quickly forgotten. The kindness I held in my heart was something no one bothered to see. From that night on, I began observing Harrison more closely, not with the eyes of a wife trying to console herself with excuses like, "He's tired, he's stressed, things will get better." I looked at him as someone I had lived with for 7 years, who was increasingly revealing a different face. Harrison wasn't always overtly nasty. He was the type who knew how to maintain his image. Out in the world, he smiled and spoke moderately, was polite to his elders, and was always ready to lend a hand with minor favors. Because of this, if I told anyone that living with him was exhausting, they probably wouldn't believe me. They'd look at him, and silently conclude that I was just a difficult, high-maintenance woman. In life, the most terrifying things aren't always loud, explosive screams. They are the tiny needles that prick you day after day until you are so numb with pain you don't even know where it started. One afternoon, I was at the dining table editing photos when Harrison came home earlier than usual. He opened the fridge, took a quick glance, and asked, "Is there anything to eat? There's some chicken soup I made this morning and some leftover roasted veggies." He sat down and served himself. After a few bites, he glanced at my MacBook screen. I was finalizing a promotional campaign for a domestic cosmetics brand. The lighting was gorgeous, the layout was clean, and the client was paying well. Harrison stared for a few seconds, then let out a scoffing laugh. Sitting around adjusting brightness and contrast on a few pictures and actually making money from it. Fascinating. I put my mouse down and turned to him. "If you have something to say it directly." He shrugged. "It's nothing. I just think your job is basically a blessing from the universe. You have a pretty face. You know how to use Photoshop and you make an easy living." Hearing that, my chest burned. A few years ago, I would have argued immediately. But that day, I just asked slowly, "Do you really think my job is just that? What else is it?" He dropped his fork and leaned back. "Try working a real corporate job for a day. Dealing with sales quotas, executives, HR drama. It's not like you where you take a gig when you feel like it and sleep in when you don't." I looked him dead in the eye. "So, you think I don't face pressure? What pressure? At worst, a client asks for a revision or a shoot runs a few hours late. Compared to a man carrying the weight of the real world, it's nothing." His words made me feel both amused and intensely bitter. It turned out that for all these years, what he couldn't stand wasn't how much I earned, but the fact that he constantly viewed my efforts as completely worthless. People say behind every successful man is a supportive woman. But in my house, my success was taken for granted, and his ego was the only thing that had to be coddled. I stood up and carried my bowl to the sink. "Behind me," Harrison added, his tone half joking but entirely suffocating. "I'm just telling you so you know your limits. It's not a good look for a woman to constantly try to outshine her husband." I turned back. "Are you afraid I outshine you or are you just terrified of your own mediocrity?" The moment the words left my mouth, Harrison's face darkened. He stared at me, his eyes narrowing. A few seconds later, he let out a harsh, quiet laugh. "You've gotten really vicious lately, haven't you?" I didn't answer. I knew I had hit the exact nerve. You can speak pure logic to someone, but to a deeply insecure person, the truth is just a weapon. That night, I lay with my back to him, my eyes wide open, staring into the hazy darkness filtering through the blinds. Suddenly, I remembered our first years of marriage. He wasn't like this back then. He used to drive 10 miles in the middle of the night just to get me soup when I had a fever. He used to stand outside the studio waiting for me to finish a shoot, holding an iced matcha latte. He used to tell me softly that he didn't care if we were eating ramen for dinner as long as we never gave up on each other. Human beings are truly strange. Sometimes they don't change overnight. They rot bit by bit, shift slightly off center until one day you look at them and don't recognize them at all. Or maybe the true nature was there all along and hardship just hadn't given it a chance to surface yet. The greatest pain in my marriage wasn't just that Harrison belittled my career. It was that every time he felt like a loser, he didn't try to work harder or sit down and communicate honestly. He chose to jab at me, to push me down, as if dimming my light would make him feel less invisible. There is one thing from a long time ago that I rarely mention. 3 years after we got married, I got pregnant. I lost the baby at 2 months. That day, I was running a massive outdoor shoot in the brutal summer heat, standing for hours after a week of late nights. By the afternoon, my stomach cramped. I started bleeding, and the hospital couldn't save the pregnancy. I lay on that blindingly white hospital bed, listening to the doctor's gentle voice while tears streamed down my face. Harrison was there. He held my hand. He was quiet. But within months, the event faded into a blurry smudge in our house. Eleanor didn't blame me directly, but she made passive-aggressive remarks about how women who care too much about making money have trouble keeping a child. As for Harrison, his sympathy turned into avoidance. He rarely brought it up, and he never held me again to mourn that loss. After losing that baby, a void formed between us, invisible to the eye. But if you stepped into it, you'd plunge into an abyss. I had genuinely wanted to try for a child again. But over time, whenever relatives praised my husband and asked when we were sharing the good news, my chest felt like it was filled with lead. If this house couldn't even sustain a gentle tone of voice, how could I bring a child into it to grow up amidst thinly veiled resentment and criticism? In the middle of the night, Harrison rolled over toward me. He didn't touch me, just tossed a sentence into the darkness. "My mom is coming over for lunch tomorrow. Make sure you cook something proper." I closed my eyes. One sentence was all it took to understand. In his heart, his mother was always the one who needed to be catered to, and his wife was the one who needed to learn her place. I listened to the hum of the vac unit, feeling colder than the air it blew. The man lying next to me felt so alienated that if I reached out, I wasn't sure I'd touch a husband. I'd only touched the shell of a man who was losing to himself every single day. The next day, Eleanor came over just before 11:00 a.m. As she had warned, she used her spare key, but she knocked 3 times as a formality before letting herself in. I was in the kitchen marinating salmon, and hearing the jingle of keys, I knew she had arrived. Older folks in the family are often like that, letting themselves into their children's home while maintaining the posture of someone establishing the rules. She wore a dark tailored cardigan, her hair perfectly coiffed, carrying a bag of groceries. As soon as she walked in, her eyes swept the room, scanning from the shoe rack to the dining table before setting the bag down. "The place looks decent, but that fiddle leaf fig on the balcony is dying. Leaving it like that drains the energy from the house." I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and walked out. "I've been leaving early and getting back late the past few days. I haven't had time to prune it." She gave a small deliberate nod, the kind designed to let you know you were being graded. Then she walked straight into the kitchen, lifted the lid of the pot I was using, checked the skillet, and eyed the fresh salad greens in the strainer. "What are you making?" "I'm roasting salmon, making a butternut squash soup, and a side of garlic greens. Harrison said you were coming, so I made some favorites." She sat down on a bar stool near the counter. When a man comes home to a proper meal, he actually wants to come home. Nowadays, so many women make a little money and think they can just live on takeout, treating the house like a hotel. Her words weren't aimed directly at me, but with just the two of us in the kitchen, every sentence felt calculated. I smiled politely. "I know, Eleanor. A warm home is what brings people back." She gave me a look. I knew she caught the subtle defense in my reply. But she didn't take the bait. She was the type who avoided direct confrontation. She sprinkled her insults like cracked pepper on a dish, just enough to make it bite. Harrison came home around noon. As soon as he saw his mother, his demeanor shifted instantly. Gone was the cold indifference he showed me. He switched to an overly cheerful tone. "Mom, you're here early. Why didn't you text me so I could meet you downstairs?" She smiled, her eyes crinkling. "It's just a few steps. No need to fuss. I just wanted to come see how you two are living." Hearing the word "see," I looked down and arranged the silverware, feeling a dull numbness in my stomach. After years as a daughter-in-law, I understood exactly what she meant. Mother-in-laws like her don't come to visit. They come to inspect. Lunch was laid out nicely. The soup was perfectly seasoned. The salmon was flaky. The salad crisp. Harrison took a few bites and said, "This is really good today, Mom." Before I could even feel a spark of joy, Eleanor chimed in. "Good is fine. But it's normal for a woman to know how to cook. What's important is knowing the hierarchy. Knowing how to keep a husband and maintain a household. Too many women these days focus purely on their looks and careers and forget their roots." I set my spoon down and looked at her. "You're right. A woman in the house needs to keep things in order." She offered a tight smile. "I'm only saying this out of love. Look at him. A man faces all sorts of battles out in the world. If he comes home and his wife is constantly arguing and trying to whop him, it breaks his spirit. And when a man feels broken, he strays." Harrison sat beside her eating in silence. He didn't defend me, nor did he deflect the comment. His silence was more bitter than his mother's words. Because when a man lets his mother throw thinly veiled insults at his wife right in front of him, it means that deep down he agrees with her. I passed her a serving of vegetables and kept my voice soft. "I understand what you mean, Eleanor. Whenever there's an issue, I always swallow my pride to keep the peace in this house." She put her fork down, looking at me with a gaze that was half smile, half interrogation. "Swallowing your pride is good. A woman who knows how to yield keeps her husband. You might make money, but if you don't know how to lower your voice, you're so focused on being right that you're going to lose everything that matters." The words were like a paper cut. Not loud, not vulgar, but slicing perfectly into my dignity. I swallowed a bite of food that suddenly tasted like ash. For 7 years, every time I covered a financial burden for his side of the family, she accepted it naturally. But the moment my capability was mentioned, she instantly steered the conversation back to how a woman must know her place. She viewed my financial contributions as an obligation, but her son's fragile ego had to be handled like fine crystal. As we finished eating, she casually changed the subject. "By the way, your Aunt Susan over in Bellevue mentioned you the other day. She asked why after 7 years of marriage, this house is still so quiet. People your age already have kids in preschool." I gripped my fork tightly. Always this topic. It never failed. The moment there was a shred of peace in the house, someone had to poke the deepest wound. I replied evenly. "Having children is up to fate, Eleanor." She sighed, her tone heavy with implication. "Fate is part of it, but when a woman is always running around outside, stressed to the breaking point, it's obviously much harder." "I'm just telling the truth. I'm not blaming you." Harrison finally spoke up, but his words only scratched the exact itch his mother wanted. "Let it go, Mom. Her job is just too demanding right now." Hearing him say her job, my blood ran cold. There are times when he is mad at me. He talks about me in the third person right in front of me. I am no longer his wife or even a partner. I am just her, a roommate. I set my plate down, grabbed a napkin, and forced my voice to stay calm. "I lost a child once. I think you know very well that some things don't happen just because you want them to." The entire table went dead silent. Eleanor avoided my gaze, cleared her throat, and said, "Well, I didn't blame you. I'm just reminding you to know your limits. A woman eventually needs to have a family to truly settle down." I looked straight at her. In that fleeting second, my position in this family became crystalline. I could earn the money, handle the crisis, and step up when everyone else stepped back. But as long as I hadn't given her the grandchild she wanted, and as long as I didn't bow low enough to make her son feel big, I would always be a failure in her eyes. The lunch ended with her reminding Harrison to take his antacids, the sound of water running in the sink, and the TV in the living room tuned back to the midday news. Everything sounded perfectly normal, but my heart was anything but. When I walked her to the door, she turned back and tossed one last airy comment. "Valerie, I'm not nagging you because I dislike you. I just worry that if a woman is too capable, she'll end up unable to hold on to her own happiness." I stood in the doorway, watching her silhouette disappear down the hallway. Behind me, the condo was bright, clean, fully furnished, just like any other home, but I knew that in this house, the thing that exhausted me most wasn't loud screaming matches. It was the sugar-coated moral lessons that sounded like love, but slowly flayed my skin inch by inch. Sitting around the table that afternoon, there weren't many people. Yet, I had never felt more entirely alone. Some choking sensations don't get stuck in your throat. They get stuck directly in your soul. You can't swallow them, and you can't spit them out. By mid-September, Seattle slipped into its erratic autumn weather, sunny and crisp in the morning, followed by torrential downpours by the afternoon. My work remained steady, 3 fixed studio days a week, mixed with days working from home, editing, and building pitch decks. Harrison, however, began to change noticeably. At first, it was just him coming home later, constantly complaining that the firm was in a chaotic transition. Then came the repetitive monologues about an opportunity, a turning point, and how if he survived this restructuring, everything would change. He bought 2 new expensive dress shirts in 1 week, picked out new silk ties, and spent much longer standing in front of the mirror. A man who used to give his shoes a quick wipe before leaving now sat every evening polishing his Oxfords until they gleamed, as if terrified someone might spot a speck of dust and judge him unworthy. One evening, while I was packing my gear into a Pelican case for a shoot the next day, Harrison stood by the bedroom mirror, adjusting his collar. "Do you think this navy tie makes me look authoritative?" I looked up at the deep blue silk. "It looks fine. Goes well with the white shirt," he nodded, looking strangely smug. "I have a crucial meeting next week. I need to be flawless." I zipped up the case and asked casually, "How crucial is it that you're this obsessed?" He turned around, lowering his voice as if speaking too loudly would scare away his luck. "The firm is restructuring the entire regional sales division. The director spot is open. If things go my way, I'm next in line." I stared at him for a few seconds. To an outsider, this would be great news. A husband getting a promotion. What wife wouldn't be thrilled? But looking at the manic gleam in Harrison's eyes, I felt zero comfort. It wasn't the look of a man confident in his abilities. It was the frantic, starving look of someone who had just caught the scent of blood. He pulled up a chair to my vanity table and kept talking. "The executive VP from headquarters is flying in. He holds the ultimate veto power. If he nods, it's basically a done deal. A foreign executive. Yeah. German. Based out of the Munich office named Steon Becker." At the mention of the name, Harrison's tone completely shifted. It became a sickening mix of awe, subservience, and desperate ambition. I felt a chill run down my spine. A mature man with real leverage approaches opportunities with preparation. Harrison was looking at this promotion like a drowning man, staring at a life raft. A few days later, his corporate obsession started bleeding into our dinners. Mid-meal, he put his fork down and declared, "Top-level guys don't just look at your KPIs, they look at your soft skills. How you network, how you build relationships, how you handle social dynamics. One wrong move, and the job slips right through your fingers." I scooped some roasted squash onto my plate and asked quietly, "Are you confident?" He flashed a paper-thin smile. "Confidence isn't as important as knowing how to seize an opportunity. In this world, if you're one step too slow, someone else will step right on your neck." He sounded like he was talking to me, but really, he was coaching himself. I didn't push it. I knew that from this point forward, if I probed too deeply, his defenses would immediately go up. Narcissistic people are like that. Outwardly they boast about their ambition, but deep down they are terrified of someone touching their insecurities. That weekend, Eleanor came over again. I don't know what Harrison had told her, but from the moment she sat on the sofa, she was practically vibrating with an unusually jubilant energy. Harrison says the firm is putting him up for a promotion. Looks like blessings are finally coming to this house. Harrison sat next to her, sitting straighter than usual. It's not guaranteed yet, Mom, but the chances are high. She looked over at me, grinning. You see, Valerie, a man with true ambition will always rise to the top eventually. As a wife, your job right now is to support him completely. Don't let petty household nonsense distract him. Rise to the top. Hearing that phrase made my heart harden. It proved that in her eyes, her son had been suppressed this whole time. And the person suppressing him was none other than me. The wife who made better money, who had opinions, and who hadn't produced a grandchild. I set my teacup down and replied politely, I always want Harrison to succeed. Whatever needs taken care of around the house, I've got it covered. She nodded, but couldn't let it go. Good. Support him gracefully. Women are often judged by knowing when to step back. A smart woman doesn't fight her own husband. If you let a man feel like a loser inside his own home, he won't be able to hold his head high out in the real world. I almost wanted to laugh out loud. Her folksy wisdom was ultimately just another tool to force me to yield when we needed money for her meds, for weddings, for emergency expenses. Nobody told her son to step back and watch his wife carry the load. But the moment his career showed a glimmer of hope, I immediately had to shrink myself down to protect his ego. After that day, Harrison changed even more drastically. He started learning basic German phrases from YouTube, occasionally mumbling them in front of the mirror. Once I walked past and heard him completely butcher a basic pronunciation. I almost corrected him, but stopped myself. Not out of malice, but because I knew men like Harrison despise being corrected. They only want to be praised for their progress. Another evening after taking a shower, Harrison sprayed on his new Tom Ford cologne, a heavy spicy wood scent, and turned to ask, do you think this smells professional enough? I was folding towels. It's fine, but it's too strong. One spray is enough. He smirked. Working with European executives is all about projecting the right image. You have to stand out. I folded the last towel and said slowly, I just hope the thing standing out is your actual competence. The air in the room froze. Harrison glared at me, his eyes sharp. Are you saying I'm not competent? I didn't say that. But you always have this patronizing tone like you're lecturing me. I stood up and put the towels in the linen closet. Too exhausted to argue. It's true what they say. Some people preach the gospel of ambition all day. But the second someone lightly brushes against their insecurities, they hiss like a cat whose tail got stepped on. That night, as Harrison stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie again, I looked at his reflection, a man desperate to climb higher, but whose eyes lacked any real honor. They looked anxious, frantic, almost starved. I suddenly realized that my unease didn't stem from his ambition. Ambition isn't a sin. The terrifying part is when someone desires a title so badly that they start viewing everything around them merely as tools to get it. Outside, the rain pelted against the metal railing. Inside, Harrison's heavy cologne lingered in the air. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling a thin, icy dread creeping through me. There is nothing inherently wrong with wanting to advance in life. But some eyes tell you instantly that they are willing to pay a very dirty price to get what they want. If you had asked me when we first married, what could make two people share a bed yet remain so distant, I wouldn't have known. The answer lies in what they know. Living under the same roof doesn't mean you understand each other. Eating at the same table doesn't mean you see into each other's souls. Harrison knew what time I woke up, knew what food I liked, knew how many recurring clients I had. But the things that truly defined me, he rarely ever bothered to ask. Before getting married, I spent nearly 2 years freelancing as a junior art director for a German ad agency branch based in New York. I was young, The workload was grueling and the European clients were so meticulous that a single typo in an email would result in a reprimand. To survive and thrive, I forced myself to learn German enough to understand briefs, sit through meetings, and communicate smoothly. I wasn't flawlessly fluent, but I was fully capable of holding my own in professional and casual conversations. After I got married and transitioned into working primarily with domestic US brands, I stopped using it and I rarely brought it up, partly because it wasn't necessary and partly because in this house, nobody genuinely cared about the deeper layers of who I was. I remember once, maybe 4 years ago, casually mentioning my old stint with the German agency. Harrison just muttered, "Yeah," and immediately asked, "Did it pay well?" I laughed it off. It was decent, but brutal. I had to learn the language just to keep up. He scrolled through his phone and threw out a careless, "Yeah, as long as it paid the bills." That was it. End of discussion. He didn't ask how I learned it, how hard it was, or if I enjoyed it. At the time, I brushed it off, thinking men just didn't care about the details. Later, I realized that when someone doesn't care about you, even your most impressive achievements are met with complete apathy. As the restructuring rumors heated up at Harrison's firm, the rhythm of our house grew stranger. He spent ridiculous amounts of time checking himself out in his phone camera, tweaking his hair like a guy prepping for a first date rather than a corporate meeting. I watched in silence. In life, the more you ask, the more people hide. Silence often reveals the truth much clearer. A week before that fateful dinner, Harrison suddenly started acting sweet toward me. It was bizarre. One afternoon, I came home completely drained from a shoot. I walked in and saw a box of gourmet macaroons from my favorite local patisserie on the kitchen island. Harrison walked out of the living room holding a glass of water, his tone incredibly light. I drove past the bakery and remembered, "You love these." So, I grabbed a box. I froze for a second. In 7 years of marriage, it wasn't that he had never bought me anything, but the way he delivered the line felt alien. It felt like he was desperately trying to sugarcoat something bone dry. I set my bags down. "Thank you." He offered a perfectly measured smile. "Was the shoot exhausting today?" "I'm fine. You've lost weight recently. Don't take on too many gigs." If it were the early years of our marriage, I might have been touched by the concern. But in that moment, instead of joy, a sharp sense of caution flared in my chest. Because kindness that arrives too late is rarely kindness. It's usually the opening move of a calculated transaction. The next night at dinner, he actively served me a piece of fish and asked if I had any shoots scheduled for the weekend. I looked up at my husband, feeling a very complex dread. His exterior had softened, but it wasn't natural. It looked like an actor reciting rehearsed lines. The climax arrived the following evening. I was standing at the kitchen sink when Harrison leaned against the door frame. His voice was unusually gentle. "Are you free this weekend?" I turned around. "I don't think I have a shoot." "Why?" He hesitated for a half second before saying, "I want to take you to dinner with my boss, Stephen." I put down the plate I was holding, the water dripping from my hands. "A dinner for 3? Yeah. Just a small intimate dinner. He's flying back to Munich for a few weeks, and I want to make a solid impression before he goes. Having my wife there will make the atmosphere warmer and more relaxed." The reasoning was perfectly sound. A husband up for a promotion wants to introduce his wife to his boss as a courtesy. There was no logical flaw to attack. If I refused, I'd instantly be branded an unsupportive wife. Yet, for some inexplicable reason, the moment I heard the words "having my wife there," an anchor dropped straight into the pit of my stomach. I asked, "Which restaurant?" "A high-end spot downtown. Very elegant. Don't worry about it." I looked him dead in the eye. "Why do you need me there?" Harrison smiled, but his eyes darted away for a fraction of a second. "Like I said, having a wife there shows stability, maturity. That I'm a family man. These top executives care about that kind of image." I wiped my hands on a towel. The answer made sense, but it did absolutely nothing to ease my anxiety. I stayed silent for a few seconds before replying, "Fine. I'll go. Harrison exhaled softly as if a massive weight had been lifted off his chest. Great. Just dress elegantly. By the late afternoon of the dinner, as I stood in front of the mirror picking out a dress, my intuition was screaming. I chose a cream-colored midi dress. High neckline. 3/4 sleeves. Not too tight, but undeniably sophisticated. I didn't want to stand out too much, but I refused to look sloppy. A woman's instinct is a strange phenomenon. Some dinners are just dinners, but sometimes the moment you look in the mirror, you feel the crushing weight of impending doom. As I was buttoning my cuffs, Harrison stepped up behind me. He looked at my reflection for a moment and said in a voice so sickeningly sweet it made the hairs on my arms stand up. Tonight, just be a bit soft. Don't be so cold. Make it easy for me to talk to him. My fingers froze on the button. I didn't turn around. I just stared into the mirror, looking at the face of my husband hovering over my shoulder. And I suddenly felt a profound alienation. I asked slowly, "What do you mean by soft?" He chuckled as if I was overcomplicating a simple request. "You know, just be pleasant. Relaxed. Talk sweetly. You know how to play the game." I turned to look him directly in the face. For a split second, the air in the room thickened. He stood there, shirt perfectly pressed, hair perfectly styled, the scent of expensive cologne hanging heavy in the room. Outside, the Seattle sky was an oppressive stormy gray, the clouds hanging low. I gave a very slight nod. Yeah, I understand. But the truth was, what I understood most in that exact moment was something entirely different. The man who had lived with me for 7 years had absolutely no idea who I really was. He only knew that I was attractive, that I made good money, and that I was presentable enough to be paraded around to save his face. The deeper parts of me, he didn't know, and he never cared to know. And perhaps that exact arrogance would soon become the most painful downfall of his miserable life. The restaurant Harrison chose was inside one of the luxury hotels in downtown Seattle. Stepping off the street, the polished marble floors reflected the warm amber lighting. Staff in pristine black uniforms stood at attention, offering polite, measured greetings. Everything radiated an intimidating level of wealth. The kind of place where if you raised your voice, you would be the one who looked entirely out of place. Walking beside Harrison, hearing the faint click of my heels against the stone, I felt a thin, invisible wire pulled taut in my chest. I wore the cream dress and a light trench coat against the Seattle chill. Harrison walked next to me in his crisp white shirt, navy tie, and immaculately styled hair. To anyone watching, we were the picture of a polished, successful couple attending an important dinner. If you judged purely by aesthetics, you'd think we were living the absolute peak of the American dream. It's true what they say. What looks perfect to the eye often hides the greatest rot. The hostess led us to a corner booth near a massive floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city skyline. Stephen Becker was already seated. He stood up immediately as we approached. Tall, perfectly straight posture, wearing a tailored charcoal suit. His hair was peppered with silver, but his face retained the sharp, commanding aura of a man used to wielding absolute authority. He smiled and extended his hand to me first. "Mrs. Valerie, very nice to finally meet you." I shook his hand, replying in polite, measured English. "Nice to meet you, too." Step-Pen pulled out my chair for me, his manners flawless. Not a single lingering glance, not a single boundary-crossing remark. It was exactly this weaponized politeness that made him so dangerously disarming. Harrison was a different story. The moment he sat down, his anxiety bled through his pores. He smiled too much, leaned entirely too far forward, and his eyes practically begged for Steppen's approval. Like a desperate student waiting for a professor to hand back an exam. The first few minutes revolved around work. Steppen asked me how long I had been an art director, which brands I collaborated with, and if I had recently shot a major skincare campaign. I answered concisely without over-explaining. Harrison constantly interjected, trying to brag about me while simultaneously using me to score points. "My wife is incredibly professional," Harrison said in English, his accent a bit forced but clear. She has an amazing aesthetic eye and handles high-end clients brilliantly. I glanced at my husband. It sounded like a compliment. But it brought me zero joy because from this exact mouth, I had heard endless remarks erasing all my hard work. Tonight he was suddenly elevating me in front of a VIP. It didn't feel like pride. It felt like a salesman showcasing a premium product on a showroom floor. The food arrived in courses. Salmon tartar, butternut squash soup, followed by filet mignon with a peppercorn reduction. The scent of brown butter, toasted artisan bread, and expensive red wine filled the chilled air. Stephen raised his glass with perfect etiquette, making sophisticated small talk about Seattle's moody weather, the tech-driven economy, and how much Americans allegedly value family. It was all so smooth, like a pre-written corporate PR speech. But it was precisely this slickness that made my alarms blare. I noticed Harrison barely touched his $80 steak. He was drinking wine far faster than usual. Every time Stephen raised his glass, Harrison mirrored him instantly. At one point, Harrison turned to me, offering a stiff, coaxing smile. "You should have a little more. Babe, this wine is really light." I just wet my lips. "I'm fine with what I have." He smiled, but a micro-expression of intense irritation flashed in his eyes. I saw it, but pretended I didn't. Some human reactions only last a fraction of a second, but they reveal everything you need to know about what's rotting in a person's head. Stephen asked a few more questions about my career. He praised one of my recent visual campaigns, calling it clean and highly emotive. Then he leaned back and casually added that he admired how Asian American women could be incredibly dedicated to their work while still maintaining such a soft, compliant femininity. The sentence seemed harmless on paper, but the way he looked directly into my eyes when he said compliant femininity made my fingertips go numb. I set my fork down and offered a polite, impenetrable smile. "Thank you." Harrison immediately chuckled in agreement. Terrified of any dead air in the conversation, he poured more wine for Steen and then moved to pour more for me. I put my hand over the glass. "That's enough. Come on. It's fine. Just a splash more," Harrison muttered, his smile strained. "We're celebrating." I stared at his hand, gripping the neck of the wine bottle, a suffocating weight settling over my chest. From the moment we walked in, he was obsessively focused on making sure I was happy, relaxed, and soft. If this were just a normal dinner, no one would push the issue this aggressively. The live pianist in the corner played a smooth jazz melody. The amber lighting hit the crystal glasses, refracting beautiful fake light across the white tablecloth. Everything was so stunningly artificial. Sitting between these two men, one my husband, the other his superior, I suddenly felt like I had been cast in a meticulously directed play. I just didn't know which act brought the curtain down. As we cut into the main course, Stephen wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and turned to Harrison. His voice dropped an octave, losing its formal edge, becoming much more casual, and then he switched to German. In that exact moment, I did not look up. I simply held my water glass, keeping my breathing perfectly steady, pretending absolutely nothing of note had happened. It was a pure survival reflex. People assume that when a woman suspects something, she will immediately glare, demand answers, or let her face contort in rage. But no. When my primal alarms went off, the very first thing I did was turn to stone. Stephen spoke a short sentence first, his pace slow and deliberate. Harrison laughed nervously, replying in clunky, eager to please German. I lowered my eyes to the edge of the tablecloth, my ears catching every single syllable slicing through the air. Within seconds, I realized the polite mask covering this dinner was about to be ripped off. And I also realized this was never just a dinner. Stephen leaned slightly toward Harrison, his voice a low, rhythmic drum beat. He said I was much more beautiful than he had anticipated. He said that women like me, if they knew how to loosen up and be accommodating, would find that many doors in life open much easier. The first sentence, I told myself maybe I was misinterpreting the nuance. By the second sentence, the palms of my hands had turned to ice. And then, Stephen chuckled, casually, Dropping the guillotine. If tonight goes smoothly, your promotion to director is practically finalized. I knew I hadn't misheard. I sat perfectly still, staring at the table. The clinking of silverware from the surrounding tables continued. The jazz piano hummed along as if the world hadn't just shattered. But inside my ribcage, something plummeted straight into the abyss. Harrison let out a strained, psychopathic laugh. The laugh I knew intimately. The one he reserved for people he desperately needed to manipulate. Then he replied in his broken, choppy German. The grammar was flawed, but the words were as sharp as razor blades. My wife doesn't understand German. Her alcohol tolerance is very low. Just a few more glasses and she'll be fine. I understand you, sir. I really need that position. I caught every single word. I didn't miss a syllable. I will probably never forget that moment for as long as I live. Not because Harrison was having an affair. Not because he betrayed me in the conventional way people whisper about. But because he sat right next to me. Sober, clear-headed, dressed in a tailored suit. Looking like an upstanding citizen. And actively negotiated. Trading his own wife like a piece of meat to secure a corporate title. 7 years of marriage. All the times I carried the financial weight. All the times I swallowed my pride. All the times I told myself, well, men have fragile egos. I should be supportive. It all compiled into this singular grotesque reality. This man had never viewed me as a partner. At best, I was a shiny accessory he brought along for status. And at worst, a bargaining chip to be pushed across the table when the price was right. I didn't cry. It was strange. I always thought that if I were ever betrayed this flagrantly, I would at least tremble or tears would spill. But no. The pain was so catastrophic it bypassed tears entirely. It solidified into a block of black ice in my chest. It was so heavy that my entire body felt weightless. Like all my blood had been drained. Step Pen raised his glass, glancing sideways at me. Harrison turned to me, his voice so dripping with fake sweetness it was horrifying. What's wrong? Babe, have a little more wine. I set my water glass down and looked up at my husband. Just one look. That face. Those eyes. That mouth. A mouth that had whispered 1,000 vows to me. Yet in that span of 5 minutes, he had become a monster I didn't recognize. I offered a paper-thin smile. Just polite enough to avoid suspicion. Excuse me. I need to step into the restroom for a moment. Harrison nodded immediately. He probably thought his master plan was flawlessly executing. Step Pen just tilted his head, his aristocratic manners perfectly intact. I stood up, grabbed my clutch, and walked away with my spine completely straight, as if I were genuinely just going to powder my nose. Only when the heavy oak door of the restroom closed behind me, did I grip the edges of the marble sink and gasp for air. I looked in the mirror. My face looked completely normal. My lipstick wasn't smudged. My hair wasn't out of place. Only my eyes were different. They were so dead and still that even I was frightened by them. I pulled out my phone and texted my best friend, Chloe. One sentence. My husband is trying to trade me to his boss for a promotion. I understood everything they said in German. I dropped a live location pin to her. My hands didn't shake. My heart wasn't racing. Perhaps when a human being is pushed past the absolute threshold of agony, a terrifying surgical clarity takes over. I ordered an Uber. Selecting the hotel's secondary side entrance pickup, I checked my reflection one last time. Do not cry. Do not go back to the table and scream. Do not make a scene like a hysterical woman. Because if I blew this up right now, all I had was my word against the word of 2 powerful men who had every exit strategy already planned. I would walk away with nothing but public humiliation. I walked straight out the side doors of the hotel. The autumn air hit me like a slap. Seattle was pouring rain again. The street lights reflecting off the wet asphalt like shattered glass. I got into the back of the Uber, gave the driver my address, and listened to my own voice as if it belonged to a ghost. I got back to the condo, but didn't turn on the main lights. I left a single dim lamp on in the corner of the living room. The condo was half lit, so quiet I could hear the second hand ticking on the wall clock. More than an hour later, the front door unlocked. Harrison rushed in. As soon as he saw me sitting in the armchair, his face immediately morphed into the mask of a panicked, loving husband. "Why did you leave without telling me? You scared the hell out of me and step on." I was about to call the hospitals. I looked up at him. I didn't scream. I didn't interrogate him. I kept my voice perfectly flat. My stomach was killing me. "I didn't want to make a scene and ruin your night." Harrison froze for a microsecond. And then very quickly, he let out a microscopic exhale of relief. So subtle an outsider would never catch it. But I caught it. That tiny breath told me everything. He bought it. He believed I was completely clueless, entirely oblivious, and still the compliant wife he could lead to the slaughter whenever he pleased. I stood up, walked straight into the bedroom, and shut the door behind me. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the rain lashing against the balcony glass, listening to the man pacing in the living room. Some marriages don't die on the day the divorce papers are signed. They die the exact second one person opens their mouth to sell the other out, genuinely believing the betrayal is just a business transaction. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The sky was still a bruised purple after the overnight storm, condensation misting the glass doors. Harrison had already left, leaving a half-drunk glass of water on the kitchen island. I stared at that glass for a long time, then turned away. Last night, that man was able to stand in front of me and perfectly execute the role of a terrified, caring husband. Honestly, if he sold tickets to his performances, he'd probably sell out theaters. I had just finished brewing a pot of coffee when Chloe arrived. She practically burst through the door, grabbed my arm before even sitting down, and demanded, "Tell me everything. Exactly what did that bastard say last night?" I poured her a mug of coffee, my voice eerily calm. Harrison sat right next to me. He told Stepan I didn't speak German. He said my alcohol tolerance was low and a few more drinks would do the trick. He explicitly said he needed that director position. Chloe froze. Her face flushed a violent red and she slammed her mug down on the counter. Jesus Christ. Is he even human? You need to report this to HR right now or drag him out in front of his precious mother. If you let this slide, he's going to walk all over you. I shook my head. If I blow it up now, he'll deny it. Stepan will wipe his hands clean. All I'll have is my word and a whole lot of humiliation. I don't have hard proof yet. But you're just going to swallow this. I'm not swallowing anything. I'm letting it sit so I can hunt them both down. Chloe went quiet. She had a fiery temper, but she wasn't stupid. She stared at me for a long time before lowering her voice. "What's the plan?" I leaned back against the counter, articulating every word. "First, I play dumb. He thinks I really came home sick. Let him keep thinking that. People with guilty consciences get incredibly reckless the moment they think they got away with it." Chloe bit her lip and nodded. "Yeah. To catch a tiger, you have to walk into its cave. I get it. But you have to be careful." I gave a grim smile. From the second he opened his mouth to sell his wife, there was zero room left for error. Starting that day, I shifted into a completely different rhythm. On the outside, I was still the Valerie from before. I still cooked breakfast if I had time. Still asked Harrison brief questions about his workday. Still made sure his shirts were pressed. I even forced my voice to be a fraction softer just to reassure him that the dinner incident was nothing but a stomach bug. And Harrison absolutely bought it. Men who chronically underestimate their wives all share a fatal flaw. They believe they are in total control of the narrative. On Tuesday afternoon, while I was editing photos in the living room, Harrison stepped out onto the balcony to take a call. The glass door wasn't completely shut. I wasn't actively eavesdropping. But some things just drift into your ears. "I told you. As soon as the money hits, I'll clear it. Stop hounding me. I'm not running away." His voice was hushed, but venomous. It wasn't the polished corporate voice he used at the firm, nor the obedient tone he used with his mother. It was the voice of a man backed into a very dangerous corner. I sat perfectly still, my eyes glued to my Mac screen, my mouse clicking rhythmically as if I hadn't heard a thing. A moment later, he walked back inside, seeing me engrossed in my work. The tension in his face instantly evaporated. That night at dinner, Harrison actively initiated conversation. "Do you have to go into the studio tomorrow? I have a client meeting in Bellevue." "Yeah. You've been super busy lately." I picked up my fork and replied naturally. "Just normal freelance life. Got to hustle to pay the bills." Hearing that, Harrison flinched just slightly. He probably thought I was throwing shade about his finances. But I didn't look up. I wanted him to start feeling tiny prickles of anxiety about things he couldn't confirm. As for me, I just watched. When you know there's a rat in the house, you don't wildly swing a broom. You quietly trace its path. Over the next few days, I noticed notifications popping up on Harrison's phone and disappearing almost instantly. Once, while he was in the shower, his screen lit up face up on the nightstand. It flashed a text preview. "Can you lock it down this afternoon?" I didn't touch the phone. I didn't need to do something so risky yet. The more I observed, the more a terrifying reality crystallized. Harrison wasn't just craving the director title to flex on his friends, his wife, or anyone who ever doubted him. He desperately needed that title to save himself from something much bigger than his ego. It was about money, debt, and it was highly urgent. That night, I lay with my back to him. Just like always. The HVAC hummed. The bedroom looked the same. The man lying less than an arm's length away looked the same. Only I had changed. I was no longer lying next to my husband. I was lying next to a man who had personally annihilated his right to be called my husband during that dinner. Break trust once and it's broken 10,000 times. The saying holds true. I closed my eyes and made a silent ironclad promise to myself. From now on, every gesture he makes, every phone call, every weird twitch of his brow, I will catalog it. Not to torture myself, but so that when the time comes, I know exactly what kind of monster I am dealing with. Enduring this silence wasn't about swallowing my pride anymore. It was about taking one step back to get a panoramic view of the sociopath I had been sharing a bed with for 7 years. Harrison had a small home office desk tucked into the corner of the living room near the bookshelf. He was usually protective of it, not to the point of putting a padlock on it, but he hated anyone touching his things. I had always respected that. Married or not, everyone deserves a sliver of privacy. But after the restaurant incident, in my eyes, nothing of his was private anymore. Everything was a puzzle piece that could lead to the truth. It was a drizzly afternoon. I had just gotten home from a client meeting. The condo was empty since Harrison was still at the office. As I walked past his desk, I noticed a corner of a white piece of paper sticking out from the bottom drawer, as if someone had slammed it shut in a hurry. It was just a tiny sliver of paper. But for some reason, I stopped dead in my tracks. I pulled up his desk chair and sat down. For a few seconds, a voice in my head said, "Don't touch it." But then a colder voice echoed, reminding me of Harrison's face under the restaurant lights. Hearing him say, "My wife doesn't know German," my hand moved on its own and pulled the drawer open. Inside, it wasn't a mess. It was horrifyingly organized. A stack of clear plastic folders, printed documents, a small notebook, and tucked underneath were several photocopies. I picked them up, my fingers instantly freezing. It was a scanned copy of my social security card, then a photocopy of my driver's license, then a zoomed-in photograph of my physical signature on a blank sheet of paper. There was also a printed spreadsheet containing my personal info, phone number, email, billing address, and my business's EIN. I sat there paralyzed. I hadn't given Harrison any of these documents for any administrative reason recently. If these were old files from when we bought a car or signed the lease, they should have been in our joint filing cabinet, not hidden away in his personal drawer like this. My heart beat slow and heavy, hammering against my ribs. I pulled out my phone and photographed every single page. I put everything back with surgical precision, even making sure the tiny corner of the paper was sticking out exactly as I had found it. While doing this, my hands were rock steady. It was bizarre. The clearer the truth became, the less I trembled. I texted the photos to Chloe. Just found scans of my SSN ID. a forged signature, and all my data hidden in the bottom drawer of his desk. Chloe replied instantly. What the hell is he using those for? I stared at the screen and typed back. That is exactly what I am about to find out. Harrison came home late that night. As soon as he walked in, he yanked his tie loose. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were darting around shiftily. I was sitting at the dining table finishing up a client deck. When he saw me, he asked a perfectly normal question. Did you eat yet? Yeah. Leftovers are in the fridge. He walked past the table, glanced at my laptop screen, and went into the bedroom to change. His walk, his tone, his routine. It was identical to the husband I had lived with for years. But only I knew that from this moment on. Every mundane action of his made my skin crawl. The next morning, through an old connection who worked in consumer finance, I asked them to run a discreet soft check on my credit profile to see if any unusual accounts had been opened. I didn't tell them the whole story. I just said I suspected someone might have used my info for a sketchy application. The person on the other end went quiet for a minute. Then they lowered their voice. Valerie, did you recently take out an unsecured personal loan? I felt a spike of ice shoot down my spine. No. I'm seeing an active personal loan in your name. It was opened recently, and the amount is substantial. I gripped my phone so hard my knuckles turned white. In that exact second, I realized I had crossed a completely different boundary. If the dinner was a brutal assault on my dignity, this was a lethal stab at my financial security and my future. That evening, I still cooked dinner. I still aligned Harrison's shoes by the door. I still asked him if he wanted his food heated up. The more terrifying the reality became, the colder I grew on the outside. People who cheat in a moment of weakness are one thing, but people who meticulously plot, steal your social security number, forge your signature, and build a financial escape hatch using their wife's identity, that is an entirely different breed of monster. When night fell, I used the excuse of an emergency client edit to set up my laptop in the living room and work late. From that night on, I started sleeping on the couch or in the guest room more frequently. Sometimes I blamed my insomnia. Other times, I said I had a 5:00 a.m. shoot. Harrison didn't ask questions. He was probably juggling too many burning plates to notice that the chasm between us had become a canyon. I sat alone under the warm glow of a desk lamp, looking at my familiar condo, feeling entirely alienated. I realized that when you live with a sociopath, the first thing you lose isn't love, it's safety. I was no longer investigating whether my husband was hiding something. I was systematically documenting his true nature. And it was far worse than I could have ever imagined. Chloe set up a meeting for me with her friend Marcus. He was a few years older than me, an attorney specializing in civil litigation and financial fraud. He spoke slowly, used few words, and maintained an icy analytical calmness. We met at a quiet, tucked-away cafe in Fremont. It was private enough to talk without anyone eavesdropping. I brought all the photos of the documents from Harrison's drawer, plus the loan information my finance contact had dug up. Chloe sat next to me, clutching her latte, staring at me with deep concern. She was probably terrified I was going to break down. But strangely, the deeper I walked into the fire, the more lucid I became. Marcus reviewed every photo meticulously. He didn't ask rambling questions. He didn't offer empty sympathies. He set his phone down, looked at me, and asked, "You can swear on record you never signed for this loan?" I never signed it. And I never gave my husband power of attorney to do it for me. Marcus gave a curt nod. Then we are highly likely looking at identity theft, unauthorized use of personal documents, and wire fraud, especially if the funds were dispersed digitally. Chloe sat bolt upright. Oh my God. This isn't just a bad marriage anymore. This is criminal. Marcus glanced at Chloe, then back at me. Correct. From this second forward, you have to divorce your emotions from the situation. Step 1. Secure and back up all evidence. Step 2. We run a comprehensive background check to see what else is opened in your name. I sat perfectly still. Divorce your emotions. It sounded so clinical. But right then it was a lifeline. If I didn't separate my feelings from the facts, the sheer betrayal would have blinded me. Marcus asked for my SSN, my date of birth, my previous addresses, and some other data to run a deeper pull through his legal channels. About 30 minutes later, he made a phone call, listened, hung up, and turned to me. His voice was still level, but it had a sharper edge to it. Now, there's something else. A life insurance policy. I thought I misheard him. Life insurance. Yes. You are the insured party. The primary beneficiary is your husband. My hands turned to absolute ice. The fraudulent loan was disgusting enough. But a life insurance policy where Harrison profited if I died, that pushed everything into an entirely different, infinitely darker, infinitely sicker realm. It made me recall his sudden, weird concern over the past few months. Harrison asking, "You're driving to these locations late at night. Aren't you exhausted?" Or the time he watched me rub my temples and said, "You should go get a full physical." Freelancers always ignore their health until it's too late. Back then, I thought he was just showing rare glimmers of husbandly care. Sitting in that cafe, connecting the dots, I felt sick to my stomach. Some displays of concern, when viewed under a microscope, aren't born of love. They are born of morbid calculation. Chloe was furious. Her face flushed red. He is an absolute psychopath. One fraudulent loan wasn't enough. He took out a hit policy on you. This guy is the devil incarnate. I gripped the strap of my tote bag under the table. Not to cry, but to anchor myself so I wouldn't collapse. What do I do next? I asked Marcus. Do not confront him. It is not time yet. Marcus replied instantly. Go home and scrub everything. Review your emails, text messages, bank accounts. Pull original copies of all your legal documents. Change every single password you have. Set up two-factor authentication on a new device if you have to. Freeze your credit across all 3 bureaus immediately. From today on, your legal and financial identity needs to be an absolute fortress. I nodded. As for Harrison, Marcus continued, let him keep thinking you're oblivious. The more arrogant a criminal is, the more mistakes they make. The meeting ended as it began to pour outside. Sitting in the passenger seat of Chloe's car, watching the rain snake down the windshield, my mind was terrifyingly sharp. The man I married didn't just betray me over a fancy steak dinner. He had been meticulously stealing my identity, forging my signature, and building a financial parachute out of my flesh and blood. That night, I went home and executed Marcus' instructions. I locked down every account, changed every password, audited years of emails, photographed anything remotely suspicious, and saved it all to an encrypted external hard drive. With every click, I felt like I was clearing out a home that had been secretly hollowed out by termites. Harrison got home around 9:00 p.m. As soon as he walked in, he asked, "You're still up? I have some work to finish." He stared at me for a few seconds, probably because I looked too calm. Then he nodded and went to take a shower. I listened to the water running behind the bathroom door, while looking at my own reflection in the black screen of my laptop. People say being cheated on by your spouse hurts. But discovering that the person you share a bed with is secretly running a financial scam under your name, that is a pain magnified tenfold. And from that night on, I knew clearly, exposing Harrison wasn't just about reclaiming my dignity. It was about ripping this entire toxic network into the light before it could destroy my life permanently. After the meeting with Marcus, Chloe and I agreed we needed to dig deeper into Step. A man like him who casually wielded his corporate power to solicit sexual favors rarely does it just once. Evil often isn't born from a single moment of weakness. It's a practiced habit. If they get away with it once, they believe they are untouchable. Chloe started poking around through her contacts in the marketing and advertising industry. For the first few days, the intel was fragmented. Some said StepPen was incredibly private. Others mentioned a vague rumor about a junior female employee who abruptly quit after a business trip. But no one knew the details. Finally, Chloe managed to extract a name. Taylor. Hearing that name, my heart pounded. Not out of fear, but because of a visceral intuition that I was about to touch something incredibly dark. Taylor's address was a rundown apartment complex hidden in a dingy alley in the University District. It was a gloomy afternoon. The sun couldn't pierce the cloud cover, and the air was muggy from the previous night's rain. Chloe and I parked at the end of the street and walked in. The building was old, the paint peeling with cheap potted plants and damp laundry hanging from the railings. I stood in front of a chipped green door and knocked 3 times. It was silent for a long time before I heard the dragging of slippers. The door cracked open, held by a chain lock. A thin, pale young woman with her hair tied in a messy bun looked out at us with intense paranoia. "Who are you looking for?" I took a deep breath, keeping my voice as gentle as possible. "You're Taylor, right? My name is Valerie. I just want to talk to you for a few minutes." She immediately gripped the edge of the door, preparing to slam it. "I don't know you. I have nothing to say." I quickly stepped half a pace forward, not touching the door, but dropping my voice to a whisper. "I am walking the exact same path you were forced to walk." Taylor's hand froze on the door frame. I looked straight into her eyes. "My husband works at your old firm under the German executive." Her eyes widened in terror. "I am not here to dig up your trauma or make trouble for you," I said softly. "I just need to know if the monster I'm facing is the same one that destroyed you." The door opened an inch wider. Taylor's lips trembled. She looked at me, then at Chloe, and finally stepped back, looking utterly drained of life. When we walked in, the studio apartment was so small. It barely fit a twin bed, a cheap desk, and a plastic dresser. There was half-eaten ramen on the desk, and a few prescription pill bottles. The smell of stale dampness mixed with cheap essential oils made my heart sink. Taylor sat on the edge of the bed, wrapping her arms around herself. Before I could even ask a question, she broke down. It wasn't a loud wail. It was silent, heavy weeping, her shoulders violently shaking from suppressing it for too long. Chloe sat next to her, pouring her a glass of water from the tap. I waited a long time before speaking. "If you don't want to talk, I won't force you, but I need to know if I'm dealing with the same sociopath." Taylor wiped her face. Her voice, "You're the first person who has ever come to me and said that." Then she told us the story. 8 months ago, the firm had a regional summit in Chicago. Taylor was an internal communications coordinator only a year out of college, hardworking and naive to corporate politics. Stephen acted perfectly professional at first, occasionally praising her efficiency. On the final night of the trip, after a group dinner, he claimed he needed urgent revisions on a keynote deck and told her to bring her laptop up to his suite. She thought it was genuinely just work. When a VP calls, a junior employee doesn't say no. When she got there, it started as work. But then Stephen changed his tone. He praised her potential, moved uncomfortably close, and then put his hands on her. Panicking, Taylor backed away, made an excuse, and fled the room. The next day, the atmosphere in the office completely shifted. Nobody said anything directly, but a whisper campaign tore through the ranks. Taylor tried to sleep with the VP for a promotion, got rejected, and is now being sidelined. The co-workers she used to eat lunch with started avoiding her. Her direct manager looked at her with disgust. Less than a month later, she was forced to resign. I sat there, my hands gripping my knees so hard my knuckles HDHD. Taylor stared at the floor. The scariest part wasn't losing my job. It was that no one believed me. They looked at me like I was garbage. Everywhere I walked in that office, I felt people pointing at my spine. Chloe gritted her teeth. "That son of a," I asked very quietly. "My husband Harrison. Do you remember anything about him from that trip?" Taylor looked up. Her eyes were bloodshot, but her answer was razor sharp. "Yes, I remember Harrison. He was the one constantly hovering around Step Pen. I saw him standing in the hotel lobby talking privately with Step Pen right before I was called up to the suite. I don't know what they said, but I remember his face. I remember it perfectly." That sentence sent a shock wave of absolute ice down my spine. So Harrison didn't just discover Stephen's predatory behavior recently. He knew he likely facilitated it or at the very least observed the exact blueprint of how Stepan operated, and he still chose to put his own wife on the chopping block. I looked at Taylor feeling an overwhelming mix of pity and suffocating rage. Pity for a young woman whose career was destroyed, forced to hide in this depressing studio just because she said no. And rage at the man I shared a home with, who turned out to be even more cowardly and vile than I thought. I gently touched Taylor's hand. I won't force you to come forward right now, but if I push this to the absolute end, it will help me tell the truth. Taylor sat in silence for a very long time. Outside, the light rain began to ping against the window AC unit. Finally, she nodded, her voice small but resolute. If you burn them down, I won't hide anymore. On the drive back, I looked out the window. My mission wasn't just about my own dignity anymore. I was dragging a trap into the light, a trap that had already consumed another woman before me. If I stayed silent, there would be more victims. That evening, I sat alone at the dining table, a glass of stale lemon water in front of me. The wind blew through the balcony, rattling the blinds. Harrison wasn't home yet. The condo was so quiet I could hear the wall clock ticking. I opened my phone and stared at my text thread with Stepan. The only messages were brief, polite corporate pleasantries exchanged after the dinner. Nothing incriminating. A predator like him is too smart to leave digital fingerprints. I took a deep breath and typed slowly. I apologize for leaving so abruptly the other night. I was feeling very unwell. I don't want my sudden departure to negatively impact Harrison's career. If you are open to it, I think we should meet to clear the air. I proofread it twice, then hit send. Less than 3 minutes later, the screen lit up. Stephen replied instantly, so fast it made my stomach turn. His text was incredibly polite. He expressed his regrets that I felt ill, noted that he understands how the wives of ambitious men often feel pressure, and ended with a single sentence. I agree that a private face-to-face conversation would be beneficial for everyone involved. Beneficial for everyone. I let out a dark laugh. Predators love using reasonable diplomatic language. They never threaten you directly. They just crack open a door, half in the light, half in the dark, and wait for the prey to walk in and trap themselves. I showed the text to Chloe. She read it and gritted her teeth. Textbook sociopath. Where do you want to meet him? A coffee shop. Needs to be crowded enough to be safe, but quiet enough to talk. I need him to feel confident, but I won't give him a chance to pull anything. I said, I'm coming with you. I'll sit a few tables away. Chloe offered. I shook my head. No. He's too paranoid. If he spots anyone he recognizes, he'll shut down. Just wait in the car near the parking lot. I'll text you if I need you. The next morning, I picked a high-end discreet coffee shop in South Lake Union. It had semi-private glass partitions, but the staff walked past frequently, perfectly safe. Before leaving, I checked my phone twice, preset the voice memo app, and slipped a secondary digital recorder into my purse. I looked at myself in the mirror. Samifati. Same woman who had sat between her husband and his boss. But I was no longer walking into this meeting as a cornered victim. Stephen arrived 10 minutes after I did. He wore a light blue button-down. No jacket. He looked even more casual than at the restaurant. That aura of relaxed power was his most dangerous weapon. It made people forget who they were dealing with. He sat down and smiled. Thank you for reaching out. I kept my tone flat. I just don't want any misunderstandings affecting my husband. Stephen studied me for a moment, then nodded sympathetically. I understand. Women in your position face a lot of unique pressures. I sat up straight, wrapping my hands around my hot tea. I just want to know exactly what you said to Harrison that night. He didn't answer immediately. He tilted his head, a razor-thin smile appearing on his lips. You are an intelligent woman, Valerie. Some things don't need to be stated explicitly. The moment those words left his mouth, I knew I had him. I lowered my eyes, playing the part of a desperate wife backed into a corner by her husband's ambition and societal pressure. I don't want trouble. I don't want Harrison to lose this opportunity. Stepan folded his hands on the table, his voice taking on the tone of a mentor teaching a life lesson. Everyone in this world has to secure their position. Sometimes if you just soften up, if you just play the game a little, nobody loses. I felt a chill run down my neck. He was sitting there calmly, elegantly, weaponizing female pragmatism to convince me to accept my own degradation. The poison wasn't in his tone. It was in the fact that he viewed sexual extortion as a civilized corporate transaction. I clenched my fingers tightly under the table to stay sharp. Then asked quietly, if I choose not to make a scene, what exactly can you guarantee for my husband? Stephen leaned back. For a fraction of a second, absolute arrogance flashed in his eyes. He believed I was caving. He believed I was choosing to save my marriage over my dignity. He lowered his voice. Harrison's future as director is virtually guaranteed. The only variable is whether you are mature enough not to complicate things. That was it. That was the audio clip I needed. I didn't press further. I just gave a slow nod as if I were genuinely contemplating the deal. We sat for a few more minutes exchanging empty corporate pleasantries. But the dagger was already safely recorded in my purse. When we stood up to leave, Stephen looked at me, offering one last piece of magnanimous advice. Think carefully, Valerie. Doors like this do not open twice. I looked at him, my voice dead calm. I will remember that. Walking out of the cafe, I stepped onto the busy Seattle sidewalk. Chloe was standing near the alley entrance, pretending to be on her phone. Seeing me, she rushed over. How did it go? I pulled out my phone and played the file. The audio was crystal clear. Every arrogant, extortionate word Stephen spoke was captured perfectly. I looked up at the traffic flowing through South Lake Union. The wind carried the scent of incoming rain. I stood in the middle of the crowded street, feeling entirely ice-cold, yet perfectly illuminated. The most dangerous predators are the ones who believe their prey is too weak to fight back. And Stephen Becker had just made exactly that mistake. I thought after the coffee shop meeting, I'd have a few days of quiet to compile the legal documents with Marcus before striking. But in the real world, when rats feel the walls closing in, they bite back fast. Less than 3 days later, the storm hit. I was at a studio in Sodu finalizing the lighting for a major skincare brand. The atmosphere was completely normal. The stylist was arranging wardrobe racks. The makeup artist was setting up brushes. Everyone was chatting and laughing. I was leaning over a mood board when my phone started vibrating violently. It was Madison, the brand manager for the client. I answered, before I could even say hello. Her voice came through tight and panicked. Valerie, where are you? I'm at the studio. Madison, what's wrong? She hesitated and I could hear the anxiety in her breath. Have you seen what's circulating in the industry Slack channels and Facebook groups? There are photos of you having dinner with some foreign executive and then meeting him alone at a cafe. The captions, they are really bad. Valerie, I froze in the middle of the brightly lit studio. I'm texting them to you right now. My phone buzzed. I opened the message. There were 3 photos. One was me walking into the hotel lobby on the night of the dinner. The photo was cropped tightly to only show me, and Stephen Harrison was completely cut out of the frame. The second was me sitting in the cafe in South Lake Union looking intently at Step Pen. The third was me walking out of the cafe with Ston a few steps behind me. The captions attached to the leaks were vile. Independent female art director trying to sleep her way into a corporate contract. Got rejected. Now she's throwing a fit. Looks professional. Acts like trash. Reading the words, ice flooded my veins. Madison lowered her voice. Valerie, you know we love your work. But corporate is terrified of PR scandals. They are putting the contract on hold until legal reviews this. I closed my eyes for exactly 1 second, then opened them. I understand. Madison, follow your protocol. I hung up. I didn't announce it to the room. I pulled out a chair, sat down, and stared at the photos. The angles were deliberate. The timing was exact. This wasn't a rumor mill. This was a highly calculated hit job designed to destroy my professional reputation. If a shadow like this falls on a freelancer, you lose clients. You lose trust. You lose your livelihood overnight. Chloe got the photos at the same time. She called me absolutely screaming. Which psychopath leaked this? It has to be Harrison or Steon. They're trying to discredit you before you can say anything. I kept my voice dangerously low. Calm down. Save everything. Screenshot the posts. The URLs. The timestamps. Do not miss a single detail. How are you calm right now? Because they want me to panic. They want me to go online and frantically defend myself like a guilty person. I am not doing that. By noon, the smear campaign had spread like wildfire through the Seattle creative community. But the most brutal blow wasn't digital. It walked right through the studio door. Around 2:00 p.m., while the crew was tweaking a strobe light, the studio doors violently banged open. Eleanor stomped in. She was wearing a dark purple trench coat. Her face flushed crimson, panting as if she had sprinted the entire way. Trailing nervously behind her was Mrs. Davis, a neighbor from our condo building, who had clearly tagged along to run damage control. The entire studio went dead silent. I stood in the center of the white cyclorama wall, watching my mother-in-law march straight toward me. In that instant, I knew she wasn't here to ask for an explanation. She was here to execute me. She stopped 3 feet away, her eyes brimming with theatrical, furious tears. Do you have no shame, Valerie? She shrieked. What the hell have you been doing to get your pictures plastered all over the internet? Do you realize you've humiliated Harrison? You've humiliated this entire family. The crew stared, shell-shocked. Nobody moved. I put down my clipboard, keeping my voice utterly monotone. Whatever you want to say, Eleanor. We can say it at home. Home? So you can lie to my face again? Her voice echoed off the high ceilings. Her hand shook as she pointed a finger inches from my nose. I can't believe we let a woman like you into our house. Acting so high and mighty while behind our backs. You're throwing yourself at my son's boss. Do you even know the meaning of the word? Chloe stepped forward from the corner of the room, ready to explode. I threw my arm out, stopping her. I knew if another hothead entered the fray, this would turn into a brawl, and I would lose the high ground. I looked Eleanor dead in the eyes. Did you believe everything Harrison told you? She let out a hysterical, mocking laugh. He is my son. Why wouldn't I believe him over a woman like you? I always knew she favored him, but hearing it screamed in public was more bitter than I imagined. Before I could say another word, Eleanor stepped forward, raised her hand, and swung. Smack! The slap echoed through the studio like a gunshot. It was so hard my head snapped to the side. The room gasped. Chloe lunged forward. What the hell is wrong with you? I held up my hand again, blocking Chloe. For some reason, I didn't want to cry. I didn't even touch my face. I slowly turned my head back, stood at my full height, and stared down at my mother-in-law. Eleanor was panting heavily, her eyes wide. She probably hadn't planned on getting physical, but her rage took over. I spoke slowly, not yelling, but loud enough that every single person in that room heard me with absolute clarity. You slapped me today. I will remember that. But the humiliation brought upon your family wasn't my doing. You should go ask your precious son why he offered to trade his own wife to a German executive for a promotion. The air in the room instantly turned to concrete. Eleanor froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. In her mind, her script only allowed for 2 outcomes. I cry and beg for forgiveness, or I scream back like a lunatic. She never anticipated that I would publicly detonate the truth about her son. I took half a step toward her. The shame belongs to your bloodline, Eleanor, not mine. Mrs. Davis grabbed Eleanor's arm, terrified. Eleanor, let's just go. Come on. The studio was graveyard silent. The only thing I felt was the burning sting on my left cheek, reminding me that any remaining illusion of family ties had just been incinerated. Eleanor stumbled back a step. The aggressive red color drained from her face, replaced by a sickly pale panic. Without a word, she turned and practically fled out the studio doors. Mrs. Davis hurrying after her as the doors swung shut. The room finally exhaled. Chloe ran up to me, tears in her eyes. Are you okay? I lightly touched my burning cheek and dropped my hand. I'm fine. This is perfect. Perfect? What are you talking about? I looked at my phone screen where the defamatory photos were still open. Then looked at the studio doors. My voice was so cold it didn't sound like me. They just burned their last bridge. The sting on my face will fade. But the trap I'm setting for them is permanent. When people you spent years honoring and serving decide to publicly execute you without asking a single question, you are officially freed from any moral obligation to protect them. The next evening, Harrison came home. His face was rigid, completely stripped of the fake kindness he had been putting on. He kicked his shoes off and glared at me, his eyes searching my face to see how much damage the smear campaign had done. I was sitting at the dining table, a cold cup of tea in front of me. Are you eating? I can heat up the soup. He didn't answer right away. He pulled out a chair, opened his briefcase, and slammed a thick manila folder onto the table. Several pages slid out showing my name as the primary applicant on the personal loan and my name as the insured on the life insurance policy. He leaned over the table, staring daggers at me. If you're planning on making a scene, look closely. Your name is on everything. The loan, the insurance. You think your hands are clean? If this blows up, you go down with me. I looked at the forged documents, then up at him. Are you threatening me? Harrison gritted his teeth. I'm warning you. Don't push me off a cliff because I'll drag you down with me. You have no proof. I gave a microscopic nod. Don't worry, Harrison. I don't argue with words. Right on cue. The doorbell rang. Harrison whipped his head around. I stood up and opened the door. Marcus walked in. He wore his usual grey suit carrying his leather briefcase. His expression as impassive as a brick wall. Harrison stood up immediately. Who the hell are you? Get out of my house. Marcus didn't even blink at him. He set his briefcase on the table, pulled out the forensic document comparisons, and spoke cleanly. I am Marcus Thorne, Valerie's legal counsel. Looking at these documents, this is no longer a domestic dispute. These are federal offenses involving identity theft, wire fraud, and forged signatures across state financial institutions. All the color vanished from Harrison's face. Before he could stammer a response, my phone vibrated. It was Chloe. I put it on speaker. Valerie. Chloe's voice rang out. Taylor handed over the flash drive. It's got the emails, the hotel itineraries, and the internal Slack logs proving Stephen's history of harassment and Harrison's direct involvement. I ended the call and looked at my husband. For the first time in 7 years, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't ego or annoyance. It was pure unadulterated terror. 3 days later, Harrison's firm held an all-hands corporate meeting. Rumor had it they were announcing the restructuring and the new directors. Harrison left early that morning. His white shirt was starched, his tie perfectly knotted, his hair slicked back. But before he walked out the door, he hesitated, looking back at me as if trying to gauge if I had folded. I just said one thing. Good luck. The corporate auditorium was on the top floor of the Seattle high-rise, bathed in bright morning light. The seats were packed. I walked in just as the meeting was being called to order. Harrison was sitting in the front row, his back straight, his face tight, but radiating an undeniable smugness. Stephen stood near the podium, looking as aristocratic and untouchable as ever. Two men who thought they had successfully manipulated their way to the top. I walked down the center aisle. Just as the HRVP was about to announce the promotions, I spoke up. My voice carried clearly across the room. Excuse me. Before the decisions are announced, I'd like a few minutes of your time. The executives on stage frowned. Harrison whipped his head around, his face turning the color of ash. Stephen narrowed his eyes, though he maintained his stoic posture. I walked straight to the AV console at the front and plugged in my phone. The next second, the audio recording from the Fairmorn restaurant blasted through the auditorium speakers. Steppen's low, predatory German, Harrison's desperate, psychopathic replies, and then English subtitles flashed across the massive projector screen behind them. My wife doesn't understand German. Her alcohol tolerance is very low. Just a few more glasses and she'll be fine. I understand you, sir. I really need that position. The auditorium was paralyzed. You could hear a pin drop. Executives gaped. Employees stared at each other in horror. Harrison leaped to his feet, his lips trembling violently. No. That's a fake. That's not I. Turned to him, speaking into the microphone in flawless, unaccented German. If I understood every single word you said that night. For the first time, Stepan's mask shattered. The polished European executive look dissolved into raw panic. I didn't stop. I clicked the next slide. The audio from the South Lake Union Cafe played. Then I handed a USB drive to the IT tech. Taylor's emails, HR complaints that had been buried, and flight logs appeared on the screen. It proved this wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. It was a systemic abuse of power. And it proved Harrison wasn't a victim of circumstance. He was a willing accomplice. Right on K. The doors at the back of the auditorium opened. Marcus walked in, flanked by a man from the firm's internal compliance and legal department. Marcus handed over a thick file. The fraudulent loan, the life insurance policy, the forged signatures. What started as an HR scandal instantly escalated into a major corporate fraud investigation. The CEO stepped to the microphone and immediately suspended the promotions. Stepan was ordered to surrender his company devices and escorted out of the room pending a board review. As the room descended into chaos, Harrison tried to walk toward me, but his legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees right in the center aisle in front of hundreds of his peers. He reached his hands out, his voice cracking hysterically. Valerie, please, I'm begging you, don't do this. Think of our marriage. Think of my mother. I looked down at the man who had tried to sell me. My voice was as cold as steel. You didn't lose me today, Harrison. You lost me the second you opened your mouth to trade me. The auditorium was dead silent. Between the bright lights and the staring crowd, the two men who had obsessed over status and power were stripped of everything in the most humiliating way imaginable. Some debts aren't paid in the shadows. They are paid under the brightest lights. Right in front of the very people you desperately wanted to impress. After the auditorium incident, things moved faster than I could process. The company that Harrison had worshipped, the company he told his mother would change his life, was the first to sever his head. Stepan was terminated and faced legal action. Internal compliance seized Harrison's files. And because of the financial fraud tied to the corporate accounts, he was fired with cause. 2 nights later, Harrison stumbled into the condo around midnight. As soon as he opened the door, the stench of cheap whiskey hit me. His designer shirt was wrinkled, his hair a mess, his eyes bloodshot. The man who had spent hours choosing cologne to impress his boss now looked like a shattered, pathetic shell. Seeing me in the living room, he collapsed onto the hardwood floor. Valerie, I was wrong. I'm so sorry. Please drop the fraud charges. Please don't ruin my life. I looked at him, feeling absolutely zero pain. Just an overwhelming exhaustion. Like surviving a hurricane. Walking out and staring at the wreckage without a single tear left to cry. Drop what? I asked softly. Drop the fact that you stole my identity. Drop the fact that you used me as a bribe. Or drop the last shred of dignity I have left. He clung to the leg of the armchair, sobbing violently. I was desperate. The debt was drowning me. I had no other choice. I let out a dry laugh. Don't blame desperation. You walked yourself into that corner. He was crying real tears. But it felt bizarre. Watching a man I had lived with for 7 years weeping on the floor. I didn't feel the triumphant vindication people talk about. I just realized with absolute clarity that this man had ceased to be my husband a long time ago. He was just the inevitable byproduct of his own greed and cowardice. The next morning, Eleanor showed up. Gone was the screaming, arrogant woman from the studio. She sat on the sofa, her hands wringing nervously, her eyes sunken. The scandal had shattered her pride more violently than any insult ever could. She spoke first, her voice trembling. Valerie, I am begging you. You were husband and wife. Please show some mercy. Give him a way to survive. I sat across from her, my spine straight, my heart completely still. A few months ago, the words, I am begging you from my mother-in-law, would have made me cave. But after the slap in the studio, after she chose to publicly humiliate me without a second thought, the last thread of family loyalty had snapped. I replied slowly. I gave Harrison many chances. I swallowed my pride for this family. I protected your reputation. But when he used my name to commit fraud and offered me to his boss, this stopped being about forgiveness. Tears spilled down her cheeks. He was just foolish. He made a mistake. I looked her dead in the eye. A mistake happens once. Methodically forging documents and plotting a cover-up is not a mistake. It is a choice. She sat paralyzed, the words choking in her throat. For the first time in our history, there was no polite societal filter between us. I wasn't disrespectful, but I absolutely refused to yield. That afternoon, Marcus and I filed the divorce papers and the civil suits. I didn't smash anything in the house. I didn't fight over the furniture. I only took what was mine. I packed my clothes, my Pelican cases, a few hard drives, my favorite ceramic mugs, and the small potted plant from the balcony. It turns out when you finally cut out a cancerous marriage, the heaviest things you carry aren't physical objects. It's the memories you force yourself to leave behind. I moved into a smaller, quieter apartment on a leafy street in Queen Anne. On my first morning there, I opened the window. The Seattle sun broke through the autumn canopy, casting bright, warm light across the hardwood floor. There were no heavy sigh behind my back, no dread in my chest waiting for a key to turn in the lock, no suffocating pressure to be the perfect wife in someone else's twisted play. A few days later, Taylor sent me a short text. I just had a job interview. It's the first time in months I walked outside without staring at the ground. Thank you. I read the text sitting by my window for a long time. That was the real victory. Not only had I escaped, but another woman was finally stepping out of the shadows of a predator. As for Harrison, word got around that after he was fired, his creditors came calling all at once. His friends vanished. The colleagues who used to suck up to him blocked his number. His greatest punishment wasn't losing a wife. It was losing the fragile, pathetic male ego he had sacrificed his soul to protect. In the end, I didn't feel like I had won against anyone. I just felt like I had finally stopped losing to myself. A woman's endurance shouldn't be mistaken for stupidity. Often we endure because we still love, still care, and still want to save the family. But once you see clearly that the person standing across from you is no longer worthy, continuing to endure only drags you deeper into the dark. For a marriage to go the distance, there must be mutual respect, loyalty, and basic human decency. Never let ego or greed push you to trample on the person who sleeps beside you. And to any woman listening, never ever believe you have to suffer in silence for the rest of your life just to protect the illusion of a perfect family. If this story resonated with you, please leave a like. If you have your own thoughts or experiences, share them in the comments below so we can listen and grow together. Thank you for staying until the end of today's story. Wishing you health, peace, and the clarity to always protect your own worth.